After Cain killed his brother Abel, the silence of the earth became unbearable. The echo of spilled blood cried out from the ground, and the face of the Lord turned away from him. Cain, marked by guilt and punishment, left the presence of God with his soul torn apart. Dejected inside, but with pride hardening his countenance. His heart was a battlefield. On one hand, he felt the burden of remorse, and on the other, he clung to the desire to survive and prevail, even far from the divine gaze. The path led him eastward, toward an unknown land called Nod, the place of wanderers. There, every stone seemed to remind him that he could no longer rest, that his destiny was to wander. However, he wasn't alone. With him was a woman, probably a relative, perhaps a sister, for in those days the children of Adam and Eve united with each other to multiply humanity. She followed him with firm steps, although her eyes were a mixture of fear, hope, and silence. When they arrived at Nod, they set up a primitive camp. The nights were cold, and the wind seemed to whisper Abel's name with every gust. One of those nights, while they were stoking the fire, she dared to speak. "Cain, what will become of us now? We've left our family behind. What awaits us in this empty place?" Cain stared into the embers and replied in a deep voice, "The face of God is no longer with me. This is my destiny, to wander. But here we will make our life, even if it is in solitude." She looked at him and tenderly placed her hand on his. "Perhaps, even in the darkness, we can build something new. Not all is lost." Days passed, and in the midst of that harsh land, the woman conceived. The news shook Cain. The life growing in his wife became a breath of hope, a beginning in the midst of exile. When the child was born, Cain named him Enoch, which means initiate or dedicated. With that name, he wanted to mark the beginning of something different, a legacy that wouldn't end in the curse of wandering. Moved by that desire, Cain built a city and named it Enoch, in honor of his son. Stone upon stone, wood upon wood, he began to build not only a place to live, but a symbol of permanence in the midst of uncertainty. It was as if he wanted to defy his destiny. Although God had marked him as a wanderer, Cain decided to leave his mark, found a home, and perpetuate his name through the work of his hands. Within the walls of that primitive city, two opposing truths resonated: the weight of guilt and the power of emerging life. Cain, the man who had shed innocent blood, now raised walls to protect his son. Enoch became the emblem of a new beginning, and the city became the tangible mark of a man who, even far from God, refused to disappear. That city began to grow. Its streets, at first just paths of dust and stone, became places where voices echoed, where children ran, where bonfires lit up the nights. Cain had daughters, and when Enoch reached his youth, he took a wife from among them, thus consolidating the descent of that lineage that lived away from the face of Jehovah. Life in Nod multiplied, but God's absence was noticeable. A generation arose there seeking progress, beauty, strength, and pleasure, but not worship or obedience to the Creator. The descendants of Cain took a different path, building a world where the human shone, but the eternal faded. It was in this context that Lamech, one of his descendants, was born, who became the first man to take 2 wives, introducing polygamy as a sign of moral degradation. His wives were Ada and Zillah. Ada, whose name means ornament or adorned, was noted for her grace and external beauty, a symbol of the vanity that was beginning to mark his descendants. Zillah, whose name means shadow or protection, represented sensuality and refuge from distorted love. From Zillah would be born Naamah, a woman whose name means pleasant, delightful, recalling the beauty that captured glances, although that beauty was not dedicated to the God who had formed man. Cain's descendants multiplied not only in number, but also in talents and abilities. From them sprang Jabal, who became the father of those who live in tents and raise livestock, nomadic men who found a way of life through livestock raising. Another of his descendants was Jubal, called the father of all who play the harp and flute. But that music did not ascend to heaven as an offering. Instead, it became sensual music, exalting disordered passions and promoting intoxication with pleasure and sin. The melodies that should have been songs of gratitude to God became rhythms that further distanced men from their Creator. Tubal-Cain, a craftsman of all kinds in bronze and iron, was also born. With his hands he fashioned weapons and tools, mastering fire and metal as if they were part of his own destiny. The forge burned night and day, and from its hammers emerged spears, swords and knives, instruments of dominion and violence rather than service. As the metals glittered in the sun, the hearts of that generation hardened like the iron they produced. Thus, the city of Cain became a center of human progress. Tents, livestock, music, and brass. In the eyes of the world, it appeared to flourish, but in reality, it was a progeny estranged from God, building its own kingdom far from the true king. It was a society that shone on the outside, but was internally devoid of divine light. Sensuality began to dominate, and women were admired more for the beauty of their bodies than for the virtue of their hearts. External beauty became the object of highest esteem, while internal beauty, purity, goodness, and the fear of God was despised. But in the midst of that corrupt generation, estranged from its Creator, the Lord raised up a new race. Adam and Eve, still grieving over the loss of Abel and the shame of Cain, received a son they named Seth, whose name means appointed or placed. It was as if God, in his mercy, gave humanity a second chance, raising up from the righteous seed an heir to replace Abel, the one who had been cast out as an innocent offering. Seth grew up with a different heart. Although he carried the marks of inherited sin, a spark of devotion burned within him. He did not conform to the path of Cain, nor to the vanity of his descendants, but sought the God of his father Adam, the Creator who had formed man from the dust of the earth. Seth also fathered sons, and among them was Enosh, whose name means frail man or mortal man. The name itself was a reminder of the human condition, weak, transient, in need of the Almighty's grace. It was in the days of Enos that something momentous happened. Then men began to call upon the name of Jehovah. Amidst the corruption of Nod, where the din of sensual music and the sound of hammers in the forge filled the air, arose a distinct voice, a cry that rose to heaven. A song of worship, a prayer that acknowledged the greatness of the one true God. There, a line of men formed who did not seek to build their own kingdom, but rather to surrender to the eternal kingdom. Two descendants now walked the earth. On one side, Cain's lineage, filled with human progress, external beauty, weapons, sensual music, and cities built on the sand of pride. On the other hand, that of Seth, marked by the search for God, by the humility of those who recognize their fragility, and by the desire to invoke the name of the Lord. These were the children of God, those who chose to walk in the light of His presence.